Then, Stephanie, people have called you for many years Steve. You didn't mind that?
I like it. It still takes me back to the 60s, which was when I was doing my most creative work. I started my company back in 1960. So my view of the situation that you find yourself in is, I'm talking about 50 years ago. So a lot of things have changed, and I reckon you ladies have got it easy compared to mine.
Yes. Show of hands, how many female entrepreneurs do you have in the room? Raise your hand if you're building a company or working on a company to be built. Nice. That's cool. We like to see that. Now, you might know that we host a female entrepreneur always in May all over the world. So we have an event with Dame Stephanie here. As we have almost 200 people hosted this month all over the world, and they are all female entrepreneurs. So we are part of a big movement, which is global. Dame Stephanie, you have been revolutionary.
Couldn't you call me Steve?
Okay.
I've just explained.
I'm happy to do that.
Yes.
So, Steve, you have had many smart ideas. One of them was born out of necessity, and you engaged many of your employees, and you turned them into shareholders.
When you work when you're responsible for a company as a founder, it becomes, and what have you got? You haven't, well, I didn't have any money. I had a lot of ideas, and eventually people wanted to join me, and I did not have the money to employ them. So I offered them shares instead. So I got a very high quality chairman, for example, by offering him shares. And he stayed with me for 10 years, I think, like that. And eventually, his few shares were very valuable. But he'd helped me do that. And that idea gave me that, you know, when you really work with teams and side by side with people, and it was a struggle. It was a family business. It felt like a family. But I wanted to share the success with the people that made it happen. Because as soon as the company became, I took the company managerially up to about 1,000 people. But as soon as it becomes that size, I'm not doing anything. All the work is being done by my colleagues. And it is right and proper and fair that they should share in the success as they share in the risks and the grot of some of the things that we have to do.
I agree. And eventually, what this did to people is when you went public, over 70 people became millionaires.
Sorry, would you repeat that?
When you went public with the company, over 70 people became millionaires.
Well, I'm very proud of that. 70 of the staff became very wealthy, and lots of other people became comfortably off. That comes from sharing. As the company grew, I owned less and less of it. And to begin with, I was very possessive about the shares. I didn't want to let them out. This is my company. But as I shared, the company grew and developed. And so although I had less of it, I was much more comfortable, it was much more safe, and financially, it stood me in good stead. I did eventually make a lot of money, and I'm enjoying giving it away now, but that's another story. And by sharing the company, it really gave strength. I keep moving my head, don't I? That's the trouble.
That's okay, that's okay. Let's talk about one topic which is very, very important today, which is the company culture. And you had a very special company culture. Can you tell us something more about how you build your company culture?
Well, I don't think you can divide me into the businesswoman, the mother, the wife. I am a whole person, and the company became an extension of me. So the values that I have became the values of the company. And so it had integrity. We were very transparent in what we do. I was very open about problems, and the relationship was very much of team working, of innovation, of learning. We made lots and lots of mistakes, but from each one we learnt. And that is probably, I don't know, people remember entrepreneurs for our successes, and I have had several. But I've also had lots of fair disasters. And it's only by learning from those disasters and the mistakes that other companies make that you think, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. Oh, I see why he didn't do that. They're right, okay, I won't do that. And you gradually learn and become an experienced businesswoman. That's not to say that I don't still make mistakes, but they're new mistakes. They're not the mistakes that I made before.
Okay, so making mistakes is a normal part of any company's life, but you realize that you can ask your staff for help. They can help you figure things out. And you were also doing lots of proposals for other companies because the way the company worked was many people have worked from home, right? How did you came up with the idea of having people work somewhere else and still work for your company?
Well, they didn't work for anybody else, Marian. They were people who were retired from the computer business in order to marry or have children. And in the 60s, basically, you stopped working in the conventional way. So they were all people who didn't work for anybody else, was combining work for my company with, they were combining that vigorous professional career with domestic responsibilities. And that was part of the dream. I wanted to have this female-friendly company, and that meant flexible working, that meant part-time working, that meant home working. Of course, we had to turn up on customers' premises from time to time, but basically, we worked from home, and I still work from home. I haven't worked in an office for 60 years.
Okay, we have a question here. What advice would you give men today to accomplish the most from co-working with their female peers?
Oh, that's a nasty one. I think we all have to learn to work with each other. I'm a humanist, and it really doesn't matter what shape somebody is, what color they are, what religion they are, what gender they are. We have to work together and try and understand each other, explain our own standards, what we're looking for. And I don't think there's any difference for men as there is for women. I think it's more natural for the women to work in a collegiate way. I'll ask for your help this morning. You feel free to ask for my help tomorrow. Because we're working in teams, the objective is to get the job done. There are issues of men patronizing women fairly instinctively. That's how they were brought up by their family. For example, I always say, I don't know if you can tell, but you can tell ambitious women by the shape of our heads because they're flat on top from being patted patronizingly. And when men do that to you, what do you do? When men have sexist talk, what do you do? Well, sometimes you ignore it. I eventually got to the stage where I could say, and everybody knew I was going to sort of say, you can't say that, it's patronizing or whatever. And you have to learn to absorb the small pricks of business life from the men. That was quite spontaneous, yes.
Yeah. That's a very good advice. Thanks for sharing it. Now, you are very unique in the sense that you have this drive to really to help, to be extraordinary, and some of it comes from you coming to the UK when you were 5, as part of the Kindertransport. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, I was born in Germany. I think it's important, your childhood has made you what you are. And that's certainly true for me. And my childhood was very traumatic. I was born in Germany of Jewish heritage. And I came as an unaccompanied child refugee to England, aged 5. I was lucky because I was clutching the hand of my 9-year-old sister. But those 2.5 days journey and finding myself with foster parents and new food and new language and new culture and new everything has really made me what I am. Having dealt with that dramatic change, I eventually learned, well, I can deal with that change, I can deal with other changes. And I learned to actually welcome change, which in a high-tech world is quite useful. And secondly, I've really had that feeling that I had been saved from Nazi Europe. And people were very tactless. They actually said to me, "Aren't you lucky to be saved?" Which is not a healthy thing to say to a small child. Nevertheless, the message got home to me, and I became determined to make mine a life that was worth saving. And so I do try not to fritter my life away. I do try to do something worthwhile each day. I don't just turn into a lady who lunches. So that's the second real impact that my childhood had on me. And thirdly, I mean, I love this country with a passion that perhaps only someone who had lost their human rights can feel. And so that gives me a lot of drive. You know, I really want to succeed. I have to succeed. I've got to be better than I was yesterday.
So your company was doing lots of projects, and some of them are very significant. What people might not realize that, for example, your company, one of your early projects was to develop software standards for management control protocol. And they are now used by NATO, for example.
When you start a company, you may think I'm going to do this, that, and the other work, but the work that actually comes in may be quite different. And some of it is really strategic. You can build on the first stock control job we ever did, led to a whole range of stock control tasks because we could say we've done it for this company and that company and so on. So you have to market the skills that you have. And when you start, you haven't got many skills, you haven't got much experience, and you have to make really a show of what you have succeeded in doing. We did those management control protocols very early. We were paid to update them over the years and are very proud of them. They're still in use. Other contracts that we had were the software for the black box flight recorder for supersonic Concorde.
Oh, wow.
And that was a team of about 35 people working on that, looking at the analog readings as to height, acceleration, speed, air pressure, all the things that you need to fly an aeroplane, and getting them into digital form and recording it in what's called a best practice box. Why it's called a black box, I don't know. The only boxes that I saw were yellow.
Yeah.
But those were the sort of major contracts that we aimed for and in the main got. We also got tilly little jobs that, you know, were sort of 5 days' work or something. And I used to sort of think, well, we'll do that for this client because he'll come back and he knows we're good. He'll come back and give us some more. But that didn't happen. When we did a series of small tasks for a new customer, he just thought of us as a company that did small tasks. And eventually we were doing tasks of 500 million. That was for British Telecom. This was spread over many years. But eventually we became a corporate, not just another corporate, but we had all the problems of being a large corporate organization. But we tried to keep that drive and energy and pleasure and fun that you have in a small company.
So you had these significant projects, and what is fascinating to me is that this is all in the time where email was not even born yet. How did you write the code, and how did you collaborate with all your employees?
When we were recruiting women to work from home, we would actually ask on the application form, do you have access to a telephone? Because in those days, not everyone had a telephone.
Yeah.
And they really needed to have that telephone because we worked on straightforward phones. And we learnt to communicate with each other, even though we'd never met. And we learnt to, I knew which child had got measles and who'd got marital problems and so on, because we always talked a little bit in social terms, and so that we began to know each other. And when we did occasionally meet, we wore little pins so that we would recognize each other on clients' premises and dissemble so that they didn't know that this was the first time we'd met. So it was a little bit of putting on a good show for our customers and making sure that everyone in the organization was really comfortable. They knew what the job was, they knew why we were doing it, they knew when the problems were, because they were a partner, they were a co-owner of the business. And that makes a lot of difference if you can share your problems and draw on the skills of the whole of your team.
So you knew about the everyday problems your team had.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
You knew about the everyday problems your team had. You communicated with them often. And you said in one of your videos that one of your best tips is to hire the best people you can get and surround yourself with the people you like most. How did you find the people you wanted to work with?
Because we were employing women and it continued to be female dominated even after the equal opportunities legislation came in, we relied very much on women's networks. We occasionally advertised. Somebody's just come up with an advertisement I put in 1964 in the Times newspaper, which was talking about a home-based programmer. And instead of sort of saying women wanted, I sort of said anti-feminists, no good for anti-feminists. In other words, I was really sort of saying either you want to work in this sort of humanistic way or not at all. And word of mouth got in the best people. The big company, IBM, excuse me, IBM was the big computer company at the time, and they were marvelous about training their staff. And they had a reasonable number of women in their employment. But as soon as the women wanted to go part-time, IBM said, no, 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 and they all left, and they came to me. So I was really gathering together the skills that other people had trained, and I was exploiting, I hope in the best possible way, exploiting those skills.
I see. My next question was about asking you, what have you learned from your competition? You just told us. Is there anything else you learned from IBM and other software companies at the time?
Well, the other thing I learned from IBM was the importance of training. I started off talking about jobs for women, and I soon realized that to have a progression in an organization, you did have to have careers for women with children, and that meant training. So we do a vast amount of training, and every organization that I'm involved with really emphasizes that training, learning from each other. Not this year, but last year I went on a training course, and this is what you have to do, just to make sure that you're up to speed and doing the very best that you can in this situation.
Okay, when it comes to company management, in a company there are everyday lows and highs. Do you remember the biggest lows at the company, and how did you deal with them?
Well, it's human nature to remember those lows. And it was in the 1970s, so the first 10 years of the company, that there was a recession hit England. And I suddenly discovered that our sales were drying up, and that it was not me that had been responsible for the company's success up to date, but it was actually a rising market. The rising computer market had taken us up, and we had benefited. And suddenly, that market had dropped. So really very, very worrying. In addition, I had a breakaway group, that is, a valued colleague who decided she was going to do something very similar, take all our freelancers staff, go after the same customers, and she knew who they were, of course. And this was somebody who I respected, I'd worked with, I was friendly with. My husband was the godfather of one of her children, and I felt absolutely, I talked about being stabbed in the back. I was really very, very depressed and miserable about it. The chairman that I'd mentioned before, he was quite helpful, very helpful, and he helped to get me stop thinking about what she's doing, just concentrate on your business and making sure that it grows. And like most things, I had to sell myself out of those problems. Go out, and I did 5 sales calls a day at times, just to get enough business to see us through. And eventually I couldn't care what she was doing, and I was quite pleased. She didn't survive long.
Okay. Now, you're a mathematician by trade. How much did you enjoy selling?
I think all entrepreneurs have to sell. I think all
True.
women have to sell our skills within the organization in which we're working. Selling is something that is a human need, and you can have training in selling. I like meeting new people. Eventually, I did come to enjoy the selling thing because I'm full of ideas, full of energy, and talking with customers about their problems. We could do this, we could do that. What about, have you thought about doing so-and-so? Did you know that so-and-so did such and such? And sometimes I gave the customer so much information in that initial meeting that he didn't bother to employ us anymore because I'd already solved his problem for him. But I did enjoy selling, and I think if you don't, you need to learn how to do it, or at least become competent. In business, I didn't enjoy management, for example, but I did go on enough courses, and I became a competent and dutiful manager. We have to, there's the minimum that I can do. There are skills, there are ways of learning how to do particular tasks. And as a manager, I had to do that, but I did not enjoy it. With selling, yes, I loved it.
Okay. Now, in this context, there's a question here asking, what is the most important thing you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey?
What was the question?
What is the most important thing you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey?
Well, I learn things every day, I suppose, but the most important has to be that business of dealing with problems, that when things go wrong, as they will, you learn to pick yourself up, brush yourself down, put a big smile on your face, and go out and sell the next job. People remember entrepreneurs, well, people remember me for my successes, but really, I'm resilient. I bounce back up again. I've learnt to do that, and I think that is the most important lesson. So it sounds very negative, not to be downcast. And then you can remain zippy and go after the next customer and enjoy work. I mean, to me, work is not just something I do when I'd rather be doing something else. I enjoy it. I enjoy my life. I'm happy to be here. It's not something that I do dutifully. I love to meet new people.
Yeah. Talking about work, one of the things which you also were excellent at was to be effective. So not long after you started a company, you became a mother. You had a son, and you had to learn how to juggle several jobs at the same time. What was your secret? How did you do that?
Well, many people asked how I managed to run a business, which many people think is a full-time job, and at the same time rear my family, which again can be a full-time job. And I really believe that the two manage to balance each other out. I am a workaholic, so the only time I forget work was when I was with my son. The only time I forgot him was when I was working. And for many years, that balance stayed good, but not forever. Eventually, when he was about 13, so 13 years of that, it all got too much for me. And I had I had a breakdown. I couldn't function anymore. I was hospitalized. It was a year before I was back at work. And I learned from that tough lesson that we can't be superwomen, that I no longer try. I need to keep myself, I need to look after myself. I need to have a certain selfishness to make sure that I remain whole in mind and body. And that was probably a more tough lesson that I should have mentioned before. It's very, it brings you down to size to realize I can't do it. So I hardly do any cooking now. I have a wonderful recipe for shepherd's pie.
Okay.
All I have to do is mention it, and my husband insists we eat out.
That's a good recipe. We'll write it down. Now, in this, in the context of when things aren't going well, there's a question here from our audience. What has your self-talk been when doubts arose in your mind about your business?
Say that again. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble.
What has your self-talk been when doubts arose in your mind about your business?
What is my soul thought?
What was your self-talk? What did you tell to yourself when you were in doubts?
Oh, you can do it. Of course you can do it. Come on, you can try again. And, keep at it. Well, try something else. And I'm a scientist, so I follow a scientific method. You try something. If it works, you do more of it. If it doesn't work, you try something else. And that's what scientists do all the time. And I'm very stubborn. I have a certain pride, and that is the pride for women. In no way was I going to let my company, my woman's company, the company that was well known for being a company of women, no way could I let that fail. And it wasn't for me, but I know that if you do something like that for the next 20 years, other people would say, yes, we had a woman's company once, lasted 3 years and then failed. And so I was very conscious of being a role model for women, and I hope to goodness that you have it easier than I did.
Yes, thanks to you as well. So you made it easier for female-only companies to be successful. Now, there was legislation about equal opportunities, and you had to employ men, right?
Well, in 1975, 13 years from the company's startup, legislation came in which made it illegal to have this woman's company. And so we had to start employing the men. Only if they were good enough. But the first few that came in were all for the wrong reasons, and they were disastrous. But eventually we got the balance right, and it became 60-40, 60% female, 40% male. So it has to be that mixture. And eventually we learned to do that. What we kept was the essence of female work, I think. We kept the team working, we kept the honesty, we kept the hard work, we kept the ability to say, I've made a mistake here, I've got to do it again, to talk honestly with customers. So a lot of the good things stayed. And even today, there are elements of the company which is now employs 40,000 people, I mean, long after I left. There are elements there that I think, yeah, I started that. So cultures are very strong. And when the men came in, they modified to our culture and made it even stronger.
So you must be very proud. Now, when the company floated, of course, most of the employees who benefited from becoming millionaires, thanks to you, were women as well. And you didn't just stop there, but you became also one of the most generous philanthropists in the UK. And not just that, you also encouraged your employees to be going this way. What made you decide to become a philanthropist?
I've shared with you my traumatic childhood when so many people gave, strangers, total strangers, gave me a home, fed me, educated me, and having had so much given to me, it seems to me inconceivable that I should not want to give back to other people. So I believe that was my motivation for philanthropy. Philanthropy is like business. It's just that the measures of success are slightly different. And I really tried to be the best sort of philanthropist I could. I started off giving anonymously. I didn't want anyone to know how much money I'd got, and certainly not how much money I was giving away. And it's very sort of British. We don't talk about money and what we do with it. But I eventually realized that I could persuade other people to be philanthropic and generous and get the pleasures of giving if I talked about my pleasures. And so I have a wonderful lifestyle. I'm focused on my business. I have a mission statement. I have an impact assessment. All the things that you do, or I did in business, have carried over into the not-for-profit area. I've supported some 70 projects of other people's projects and projects that I've initiated myself, set up 3 charities, and taken each one into sustainability. So those charities now run without me. Together they employ 1,000 people. They are really probably my legacy, to leave one in particular, a very powerful charity, which I expect to be there in 200 years' time.
Yeah, we have to say that one of your charities, they are really on the verge of the latest knowledge in the space. One of them was Autistica, was set up for understanding better what's behind autism.
Yes, I focus on the things that I know and care about, and autism is one of them, obviously, for my son. And the first charity that I set up was a very sort of self-centered charity. It was a charity that would look after him. And that charity now looks after 143 people with autism and keeps an overview of another 100 on a one-day-a-week basis. And that took me, how long? 17 years to get that charity sustainable and standing on its own feet. The next charity is the big one, the one that I really, really enjoy. I put 30 million into that, and I set up a very profoundly professional school for pupils with autism. And that employs about 600 staff. It has a robot helping to teach them. It's really quite an exciting organization. And that is the one that I think every time I go there, my husband said, I come back with a smile on my face. But the third one is, I think, the most strategic, and that is medical research into the causes of autism. And I'm selling books, by the way, on behalf of Autistica, because we still hardly know what autism is. We know what it looks like, or we're beginning to know what causes it, but it's a big, big question mark, and the only way out of that, really, is research. And so I fund research, I fund Autistica's projects. I don't get in, I'm their president or something like that, but I don't get involved anymore. I want to do the next project.
We're curious to find out what is the next project for you.
Well, at the moment, it's a very risky project that everybody says, Steve, you're mad to do that. Well, 3 years ago, I started a project that involved several people with autism contributing. And I learned from that project how innovative they were, how much they added to the project. At the same time, they were all people who were unemployed, but not unemployable. And so I began to sort of think, how can we sort of channel into this pool of particularly innovation, very creative. And so I'd got to know a few of them, and they had a nominal leader. And so I talked with her and gave her basically £100,000 to be spent however the group thought, as long as it was on autism. And I thought, supposing this is an autistic group, supposing they all just take themselves off on holiday, that would meet the requirements. But in fact, they're doing very solid work, and I'm delighted with it. But I mean, that is my current risky venture, which I think is going to be a success, but we shall see.
I'm pretty sure it will be. Now, you must be very proud about having achieved so many successes in giving back to people and being generous. And you say you lead by example. You encourage people to also donate and be generous by example. Do you have any tips on how other people can do that as well? How can we ignite others' passion for helping the community?
Well, people think that giving is just for the wealthy. And that is really not so. The pleasure of giving comes much, much earlier. If you put 50p into a street person's hat, that's a generous act of charity. But it's when you start thinking, what is that person doing on the street? Why isn't she in employment? Why isn't he in a hostel? Then you start behaving like a philanthropist, and we haven't spent a penny yet. So the whole concept of using your professional and intellectual skills and interests in a philanthropic way allows you to enjoy that aspect of your life. I mean, I get enormous pleasure from seeing the school, of seeing the people of seeing these projects come to fruition. And everybody's got to start somewhere, and you start small, you start locally where you can see what's happening. You start with people that you know. If you like cats, you do not support a dog charity. If you like, you just keep to things that you know and see how you get on. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't, try something else.
Okay, now I was going to ask you about what's coming next apart from your project, but I'd like to share with the audience one very interesting fact about Steve, and this is the fact that your book is not just an amazing biography, but it's also being filmed as we speak, right?
No, it hasn't started
Oh, it
yet.
hasn't started.
But we've got a producer, and we've got the money coming in.
So we will soon be able to see your story in the cinema.
Yes.
So you'll be a superstar, a rock star.
Well, I won't be appearing in it myself. I will have a very glamorous stand-in.
Okay, so please watch out for that. Now, we have a few minutes for Q&A. We will be starting taking some questions from Slido, and towards the end, you can also raise your hand. There's a question here. If you were to start a company today, which industry would you target?
Well, it would be IT, I'm sure of that. I think probably in virtual reality. I think this is very underestimated. I can see little gaps that I would like to do in entertainment, in medical possibilities. So I think in virtual reality.
That's interesting. Okay, next question is, how did you find clients at the beginning?
Well, how did I find customers? I talked about writing lots of letters, and I looked in the newspapers as to who was advertising for programmers, computer programmers. And so I would write to them saying, I'm not applying for a job, but I can do the work for you as a consultant company. And that slowly got a little bit of response, as I've explained. Word of mouth is very, very important. My ex-employer provided my first contract. That sort of dissembling, of pretending to be slightly bigger than we were. I talked about having a six-figure turnover. And everybody thought I meant $1 million. And actually, I was talking about 100,000. I talked about to make sure that people really knew, or people thought they understood me. During that 70s recession, I was down to a single contract. And I can remember inquiries coming in on something or other, and I said, excuse me, what's the contract number? Hold on 1 minute. And I was pretending that I'd got lots of contracts. I was scrabbling through those days it was paper, to get the right contract. And that's a question of just keeping your best foot forward. And I think that is necessary for us as individuals, and it's certainly desirable for a business.
You have so many stories. I could listen to you for hours. Now, next question is, being one of the first women to do what you've done, where did you find your inspiration? Was it your passion to just be better than other people, or how do you find that?
I think I do have a passion to be better than I was last week, and that is this learning and innovation. But I read quite a lot, not only just newspapers, but also books. And I think I try to read and study and hear about and of people of quality. People like Nelson Mandela, whose ability to forgive others was just fantastic. People like Mother Teresa, whose ability to love is something that I must say I would like to emulate. When I'm working with autistic children, it's not all that easy to love them. And so it's from people like that that I try to learn how I can be stronger, how I can be better, how I can be more resilient, and give more back.
And you are very resilient. We can all see that. Now, when you look back and look at your legacy, you are a big role model for women. Did you have somebody to mentor you when you were starting, or how did you get advice from other people to help you with your business journey?
I didn't have a mentor as such, but I came across a local technical college? I think they even called it a management centre, which I attended, and I learnt. They ran some fairly interactive teaching sessions. They were more coaching, and that little local college, I think, helped me a great deal. My foster father was in business. He was an engineer, and he did finish up as managing director of his company. I don't genuinely think he had much impact on me. Certainly my father didn't. He was all in public service. So a lot of it really comes secondhand from books, from seeing other businesses, of trying to learn from them, reading about them, reading their annual reports, trying to get on top of this very complex but thoroughly enjoyable world of business.
Now, next question is, what advice would you give to live a happy life? That's a very wide question.
What do we mean by happiness? I think to me it's a sort of contentment. It's not original, but somebody said that the way to a happy life is to have some target that is, with difficulty, achievable, and then see yourself moving towards that target. And I think that probably defines it for me. I do have targets in the plural, and I can see myself gradually moving towards some of them part of the time. It's certainly not an easy life. It's certainly not the way that you might choose to be happy, but it makes me happy and keeps me going.
If I can ask about your journey, so you left Germany when you were 5. You had a foster family. Then after the war, did you reconnect with your parents? And how was it?
Well, it's a very insightful question. Having been separated during the war for many years, we were reunited. We're very, very lucky because many of the Kindertransport children lost their parents and were never... but I never really bonded with them again, having had that break in... really, I'm the child of my foster parents. So although my mother in particular, I looked after, she aged, but my father I hardly really knew. Yeah, it was not a good thing, but that was the least of my problems, and we were together. We all survived.
Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about the workplace. There's a question here. What do you feel women bring to the workplace that men don't?
What women, I think, bring intuition. We bring much more of the caring qualities. And I know this is a stereotype, isn't it? But we have a sensitivity to some of the people issues. There's a lot of technical work going on, for example, that doesn't take women's viewpoints into account. And that means that, you know, you have people designing safety belts that don't allow for pregnancy, for pregnant women. That we have the thalidomide tragedy where, again, it was a question of pregnant women. But I think the consideration of all aspects of life, not just money, but also pleasure, love, entertainment, family, sport, all art, music, all these things are part of the way in which a person can lead a good life.
Okay, there's a question here as well about your management style. So how would you describe your own management style? You said you didn't like management, but you were learning a lot.
Well, somebody described my management style as matriarchal, and they were really being very rude. They did not think that was good. I think it's visionary. I don't really tell people what to do. I try and make it clear this is where we're trying to go, this is what we're trying to do, and leave it to them to use their intellect, their energy, their ideas to help us get there. There are so many different styles of leadership. I don't think it's particularly feminine. There are other visionary leaders who, again, think long-term, I mean, as the company got bigger, I found it more and more difficult to have these quarterly results that you have to work on and, you know, 5-year plans and stuff like that, because I don't really find that natural. I find it natural to sort of say, that is where I want to go. So what do I have to do on Monday morning? And so that's visionary. I think a man would always be called visionary. Sometimes I was just called naive.
I think we can all agree on how visionary you were. Let's take 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and then we wrap it up. Please raise your hand. Peter, over here. Yeah. So please stand up, tell us who you are, and ask away. Quick question, quick answer.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth. My question is 2 parts. One, do you find that you ever still dream in German? And the second part of that is, having had to do simultaneous translation at such an early age, do you feel at all that that gave you an edge in terms of competing with men?
Thank you for that question. I've never been asked before. I was one of those children who deliberately forgot my German. I refused to speak it. So I haven't dreamt in German since I was 5 years old. The second half of the question was, has it impacted me? I don't think so. When I watch a German film, I kid myself that I'm understanding it. But if I'm not looking at the subtitles, I realize I'm not at all, you know.
Okay.
So it's really, I'm probably more English than you imagine.
I see. Okay, next question. Please stand up.
Oh, hi. Really enjoyed your talk. I just came back from China and met the entrepreneurs in China. One thing I realized is I talked to a female entrepreneur. She refused to be identified by female. She said, if we have to, man and woman have to face death, aging, thickness the same, then I would just want to be identified as human. So she basically refused to be victimized, which I found a lot in Western society. So the victimhood or identity politics. I'm a female, I work with men, and I only want to be judged by my merit. I don't want to be judged by my identity.
Would you call yourself a feminist?
No, I'm not.
No, I wouldn't either.
I think, so my question really is, because coming from China, which is a communist country, not so much now, equal outcome is very, very dangerous. It's very real to me. So my question is, do you think modern feminist has gone too far? Thank you.
Feminism has come to mean very different things. I'm probably a feminist indeed, though not in word, because I have done a lot for women. I care about women. I probably will be remembered for all the doors that I've opened for you and other women. The world has changed. It used to be a binary world. You were male or you were female. I've worked with 2 transgender, one female to male, the other male to female. But the fact is, it's a sort of almost continuum. And increasingly, I think we will see people who will not identify as either male or female. I'm a person, that's how it is. And I would welcome that, but I think it's a little bit idealistic. the little that I know about China is that the role of women has been very subsidiary to that of men. I've been to Russia, or former Soviet Union, and I know, in fact, that the role of women came up during the communist era, so that you would see women doing what we think of as male jobs, sweeping the streets, but they were never doing any of the senior jobs, but they were given work. So what's going to happen in China is really up to you and me. What can we do to make sure that the role of women moves fast, moves safely, does not finish up with a whole lot of female babies being killed or aborted? And that's what has been happening in the past when you try to socially engineer an organization. I think my short answer to your super question is, I don't know.
But you have put it very beautifully. Now, you said that your company was a crusade for women. When I first heard you speak, there were 3 speakers there. There was the CEO of Google, there was a CEO of DeepMind, an artificial intelligence company, and there were you. And I was going home fascinated by one of the 3 speakers, not the other 2, but you were just amazing. Now, I hope you understand why. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And my last question is, you have helped the world a lot. How can we help you?
I think you will help me strategically if you start to think in terms of philanthropy as something that can start right tomorrow. You don't have to wait until you're wealthy. You don't have to wait until your company is very prosperous. But you can start thinking in terms of other people in the world and doing something about it. And when you do that, you really help me. Thank you. You can buy my book.
So, ladies and gentlemen, Dame Stephanie Shirley, once again.